Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number 20, More Technical Track, Computer Forensics with an emphasis on the NT operating system.
Glad to be here this afternoon to speak to you about forensics. As you can tell from the slide, I'm going to be speaking about the investigator's perspective. I've been with JAWS since November of 2000. Prior to that, I had 16 years in law enforcement, a combination of local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. And in my federal law enforcement time, I had around 6.5 to 7 years of computer crimes experience with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I was thrown into the fire of computer forensics in the early 90s before there was training, and it hadn't been an easy process to learn a whole new field. But today I hope to be able to share with you some of the things that I've learned over the past several years. One of the points that I wanted to try to get across today was that most of you or all of you are technically proficient in computers and in networking and in communication, but you may not be proficient in the knowledge of how it's handled in the criminal world and how evidence is gathered and presented to a grand jury and presented in for prosecution. I don't want to go into details of how it goes to prosecution, but only that when the investigator who's showing up at your network to do a forensics analysis, he's going to be doing some things that you're probably going to wonder, why is he going about it that way? And I hope to answer some of the questions that you may have about the investigative world in forensics. Just share with you my experience. Just real quick, a show of hands, has anybody had to deal with a federal CART team or a computer crimes team? Am I right to assume that they did some things that you wondered about, and they asked questions and they looked for files that didn't seem to make sense? Just a lot of the times when I would go to a network to see a network administrator or to see a CIO about a particular problem that they were having, they never understood why we didn't just make a copy or of a particular file and walk away with it and use that as evidence. And we always had to explain the procedures of what we go through to make evidence admissible in court. Go ahead, ask a question.
Weren't you trying to prevent at that point a lawyer for defense trying to show that the data was tainted in some manner?
That's one of the reasons to make sure it's not tainted, and we deal with the rules of evidence. And one of those rules is you have to have original evidence. Well, if we just copy files off of a hard drive, in Windows environment it's constantly writing to the hard drive, then we've ruined our evidence. Everybody can read the definition of computer forensics. This is a combination of what the Department of Defense calls it and what the federal law enforcement community calls computer forensics. But basically, it's just applying analytical techniques to a computer or to an operating system and the file structure to gather evidence, to look for evidence that could be used to prove or disprove a certain event. When I started in computer forensics in the early 90s, it didn't make sense to me how to go to look for the information. But when I realized and compared it to a burglary of a house, it made a lot of sense to me. Different techniques in looking for the evidence, but when I did burglary investigations and as a crime scene investigator, and I would respond to the scene of a burglary, I was going to look for the methods of entry. How did the burglar gain entry into the building? What did he do while he was in the building? What did he leave at the building? What did he take with him? And what other evidence is there to identify, or at least tend to identify, who that suspect is? If you think of the computer intrusion, it's the same thing. It's not a building we're going into, it's a box. and how did they get there, and how did they gain entry. It's the same investigative process, just a different method in collecting the evidence. As I said a few minutes ago, my objective this afternoon is to make sure there's a good understanding of what it is that the investigator is doing, why evidence identification and preservation is required, why you can't just use that copy of the file, why you need the original evidence. I want to talk a little bit about who benefits from computer forensics, general types of forensic examinations, processes, which is the most important part to me, is a standardized method to conduct a forensic examination of computer evidence. I will show some samples of some tools of the trade that we use in forensics. They're basic models, not the advanced models today. And again, what is it that the examiner is looking for? In the legal world, evidence is everything. Evidence is the proof. If we think about the high-profile criminal cases that made it in the news over the past several years, it's always the evidence that either convicts a person or allows them to go free without being convicted. It's proof. What we need is the proof that something either occurred or it didn't occur. When computer crimes first started coming to light in the early 90s, well, it was late 80s, early 90s, we didn't generally, in law enforcement community, didn't generally conduct an investigation of the computer crime the way they do today. But over time, we started realizing that there were more victims out there than what we realized in the beginning. We realized that there were more people who needed the forensic service. And as you can see, I've listed naturally the victim in law enforcement, but insurance carriers in the legal system. With the exploitation of vulnerable networks by hackers on naive network administrators who didn't even know their systems were exploited, and they were used as jumping points to start attacks. The legal system has now caused that type of a network administrator to be sued, civil litigation for negligence. So insurance carriers who are insuring corporations against incidents like this are really requiring forensic review of systems and penetration testing of systems so they can mitigate any circumstances that deal with an exploitation of their network. Having worked in the law enforcement community for a long time and for the Navy, I saw the victims as being the government or being business. As we're all aware, the military has been victimized numerous times and will continue to be victimized numerous times in network exploitation and other various computer crimes. But the forensic analyst is doing more than just intrusions. We don't strictly just work intrusion forensics. I would estimate 60% of my work since the early 90s on computer forensics has been in internal investigations, either internal with the Navy, internal with defense contractors. Since my employment with JAWS, 90% of my work has been internal investigations in private corporations where suspects or employees are suspected of stealing or at least just viewing sensitive corporate data. They're also suspected of taking that corporate data and transferring it to competitors. So when we speak of forensics and we think about it, it's got to be more than just network intrusions. It's got to be the insider, and it's got to be looking at suspect machines trying to find that evidence. I've displayed this particular article about a hospital who's had a server exploited. Server was located in Seattle, and they reported publicly that there were over 5,000 patient files taken from their server. They didn't report what else was taken, and we all know that servers share space and that there are other things that were present on that machine. But we don't have one victim here, we have 5,000, and it's those 5,000 patients. That's a big victim. And I saw this, they called it breaking news. The FTC and the FBI sites are open for hacker access. I think we've known that for years. And again, for the individual, there's more than just home workers endangering their corporate networks by telecommuting. Home individuals are becoming more susceptible to intrusion and exploitation. And what I have seen, it's because of the new high-speed connectivity and full-time connectivity and cable and DSL modems. There are a lot of reasons for forensics analysis. Hopefully it's to identify the perpetrator. Strictly from forensic analysis, you're not always going to identify who it is that violated a network or who it is that committed a certain crime within the network or on that computer. But that is one of the reasons why we do it. Another reason why we conduct forensic analysis is to establish that a crime occurred, that your network was exploited or unauthorized access was gained or files were stolen. Whatever the crime is, in order to prove the crime in a court of law, we have to establish that the crime occurred in the first place. Sometimes to me it sounds ridiculous if I say my computer has been violated, that somebody entered it, gained information, and they didn't have my permission, then that's a crime. But in the courts, you have to have more than just somebody saying this occurred. You have to be able to prove that it occurred. So that's another reason for forensics analysis. Here's one we usually get. And it's what method was used to gain access to that network. If it's a professional hacker, generally we're not going to get too much information of how this incident occurred. We'll just know what happened on the box or within the network. But when a system is exploited, one of the things that we're always asked to do is to identify what were the weaknesses or vulnerabilities in the system, and can you identify what the hacker did so we can prevent this in the future. We're always asked to conduct damage assessments of the victimized network. And finally, we do forensic examinations to preserve evidence for judicial action.
Question.
Go ahead.
Do you find that, like, to me, I do a lot of computer investigation, and internal, as long as you have policies to back them up, the investigations are easier. But I have a hard time dealing with the internet service providers. Do you find that when you're doing your investigation?
Yes, and that's because of the Telecommunications Privacy Act. Have they cited that to you in the past? Oh, the question was, in conducting internet crime investigations, have I run into difficulties in dealing with ISPs, internet service providers? And my answer is yes. And our country has a lot of laws to protect privacy. One of the laws that we have is the Telecommunications Privacy Act. And it goes to more than just an ISP, your Bell Atlantic or your Sprint or AOL. Those are well-known ISPs, and nobody would question that they're an ISP. In some districts in the United States, the courts have held that a company who provides email communication for its employees falls under the same rules as a telecommunications provider. So the Telecommunications Act, Privacy Act, even applies to the corporate network. Now, that's not in all districts in the country, but there are several districts, and Southern District of California is one of them. Did that answer your question?
Well, I was just wondering how you combated the problem. I find And they're like, well, how do I know who you are? And, they want to talk to our lawyers, we want to talk to, by the time you go down that whole path, it depends how bad the incident is. Because I've been able to show them sometimes who, the where or, supposed information, but in order to totally verify it, you need their assistance. And a lot of them won't help with that law enforcement sort of thing. So how do you approach that problem?
Okay, what her question is that in a lot of the larger ISPs, they will generally help to a certain degree the system administrator or a forensic examiner who's not law enforcement. They will help them backtrack or provide them with log files or any other information, subscriber information that they need, generally. What her question is how have I been able to deal with that and deal with the, I'm going to call it obstruction, in your investigation or in your forensics analysis? Because when we look at a network that's been victimized, that's not just the only place where the crimes occurred. Crime goes all the way through the cable, all the way back to the suspect machine, so we hit every hop. How I've dealt with that in the civilian community is the same way we did it with the federal law enforcement, and that was with subpoenas, civil court subpoenas.
So they won't even give you little bits of it. You have to get to that point.
The ones that have been sued or they belong, or their insurance companies tell them not to do it because of the lawsuits that occur over the Privacy Act, they won't do it without a subpoena. Under a federal subpoena, the ISP is not allowed to tell the subscriber or the suspect that this information was pulled for a certain period of days. However, when you go to pull that subpoena and to serve it on an ISP to gather those log files or the subscriber information, go ahead and assume that your suspect's going to be notified immediately, either intentionally or unintentionally, and generally it's because the ISP is going to terminate his service for a violation of term of service or for the agreement of the service of ISP. So just be prepared for that when you serve that subpoena. Was there another question? Several times I have sometimes been frustrated when the CIO or a network administrator says, we want you to do a forensic analysis of our network. And that's it. That's your direction, a forensic analysis of the network. Well, all of you are technically proficient. If you're going to look through every bit on a machine for whatever, it'll take a long time, and what results are you producing? So we always try to narrow down what is it that you're looking for, what is it that happened or precipitated the need for this forensic analysis. And these are some of the requests that we get. Intrusion analysis, mainly we do on hacks that will be prosecuted. Damage assessment occurs every time. When a suspect's machine is identified, and it's not always the 16-year-old hacker in New Mexico or in Canada, it's, as I said earlier, 60% of the hacks, in my experience, are internal. So we're looking at 60% of the machines in business, we look at them for evidence. Log file analysis, we don't look at the log files to see what's occurring within the network or for any anomalies. We're looking for connections. We're looking for different activities on the network that may identify who the suspect is or who the person is that was taking action at a certain time that caused a certain event to occur in the system. Questions we ask during an intrusion analysis is we want to know who gained entry. And it's just like that burglary I talked about earlier. You show up at the house and the door's been kicked in and the television set's missing and all the jewelry from the house is left. We want to know who gained entry and took a TV and didn't take the expensive jewelry that was easy to conceal and to carry out. What did they do while they were in our network or while they were in our standalone machine? Now let's hear, when did this happen? For prosecutive purposes, it's not just important to know when something happened, it's required. You can't prosecute a crime without knowing when the crime occurred. You know, I said earlier that we have to establish that a crime occurred. The other thing that the investigator is going to show up and want to do is he's got to establish when it occurred and where it occurred. And that all comes down to where a case would be prosecuted. So you may think, well, he hadn't even started his analysis and his examination, and here he is already trying to establish these facts. And it's all because he's not looking just at the end of the analysis. He's looking at the end of an investigation. Where is it going and how is he going to get there with it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I've heard it's very important that for the logs, that you have logs on multiple servers, so you make sure that all of them are time synced. So you can tell exactly when, you know, the sequence of events happen, that sort of thing.
His question was, he heard that it was very important when you have separate servers with separate logs to make sure that your times are synced. And that's real important when you have somebody like me who's mathed and that strong, and we sit down to compare log files and having to subtract or add minutes. Yes, it's very important to keep your log files time synced correctly. But that is one of the things that we do in the process of an analysis, and I'll cover that in a few minutes, but how we check times on machines and to compare them against log files.
How exact does the time window have to be? Like, say an attacker got in, destroyed all the log files, and you know what happened within this period of maybe 48 hours. Is that exact enough to prosecute, or do you need to be able to narrow it down more?
That's close enough. His question was, how exact of a time do we need, or does law enforcement need to establish when a crime occurred? And he asked, was 48 hours a good enough time frame? Yes, if you can notify the law enforcement or you can show evidence within 48 hours or something to base that on, something to base when it occurred, then yes, that's no problem to prove the time.
So how far can we stretch that out? Like if the attack occurred, if you found out months down the road that an attack occurred and then the attacker done a pretty good job of cleaning up after himself and you can't really isolate a date, how broad can that get before they can't prosecute it?
Okay. Question is, if the attack originally occurred months ago and these several months pass, how much time frame do we have in order to prove when the attack occurred? That's the nice part. You don't have to show when entry was first gained. As long as entry was gained somewhere in time that period of the time you detected it, then you've established when the crime occurred.
When you go in to do your investigations with other companies, do you work with the sysadmins if they're not the ones that are suspect, or do they create accounts for you and you guys do your own thing?
The question was, when we go into a private company to do a forensic analysis or an investigation, do we work with the sysadmins or we just have them set us up accounts? In the forensics process that we use, we don't do live forensic processing. We'll turn a machine off, image a hard drive, or image, if it's RAID, we'll image the system, put the system back up, and then we work with our images. But yes, we do work with sysadmins, even if they're suspect. It's nice to know that they're the suspect before we go in, and we just handle that situation as we go along.
So they don't give you a route.
They what now?
They're not like giving you a route when you go in.
No, when we make an image of a drive and we do the analysis, the forensics analysis, booting that drive or that network is the last thing that we do. We boot it as a slave and use an analysis machine to look at that system and to gather our evidence. Excuse me?
What does that do to your original evidence rule, though? You're making a copy, you're actually analyzing the copy.
Okay, he asked, what does it do with the original evidence rule that I spoke of earlier? Now, I'll cover in a few minutes the forensics process, but to answer your question, when we show up to make an image of a drive, we will take the original drive, make a bit-for-bit image of it, put a new drive in the machine, take the original, place it into evidence where no one can touch it and it can't be harmed. We have our image of that machine and we constantly restore it and work with it from the image. Does that answer the question?
So you're taking the original drive and locking it
Right.
So you would actually have two copies that once you leave with the customer, so they can continue working, and then a second one that you're actually analyzing to find the data. And if anything happens to that, you revert back to the primary to get your data back again and restart your analysis.
Right.
Okay.
Does anybody need me to repeat that? Okay. A lot of these questions in the intrusion analysis, as you know, every one of you have looked at a network. We can't answer all of these questions, but this is what we're trying to do in the analysis. I have listed why the chosen network. It's always been important for future protection of machines or networks to know why a suspect or somebody targeted a particular machine. Usually it's a random incident, or it was a target of opportunity, but we want to look in the analysis, did they hit the network and go specifically to try to do something specific? And when they were in the network, was there a specific act that was trying to occur, or was it just vandalism? And as I said, damage assessment is something that we're always asked to do. And with the Navy, they were always interested in knowing, well, they got into my machine, what did they see that was on my machine? And we generally gave the CO the answer, everything. And they never liked that. So we've always focused forensic examinations on what was on the network, or on this one box, or wherever it was that we can show that access was gained, or the unauthorized access was gained. What was there for them to see? Well, earlier we saw 5,000 patient files from the hospital in Seattle. That's a lot to see. We've all aware of the incidents where credit card information has been taken. There's a whole slew of information that's been taken in the private industry off of machines. But the information that we always look for in damage assessment is what was on that one particular box that would give enough intelligence to that hacker to move to another network, to a trusted domain somewhere else? Was there password files? Were any information that could be used to target other networks is what we're looking for in damage assessment. We always try to determine, what did he take? Looking at something and taking something is different. If we identify the suspect and are able to get to the suspect's computer or to any of his stored media or offsite storage, we love to do what's called file comparison, and it's excellent evidence. And then there's, what did he leave behind? When I started off as a police officer in 1984, I responded to a robbery, an armed robbery of a Burger King restaurant. Interview the store employee. Store employee says the suspect came in, ordered his meal, he went and sat down and he ate it. He got up, came over, stuck a gun in my face and robbed me of all the money that I had in the register, and then he took off and he ran. Well, and this is where I'm coming at on what did he leave behind. The suspect was sitting in a booth. He left his wallet. Ever since that investigation that I did of that Burger King, every crime scene I've been to, and especially computer crime scenes, I look at what did he leave behind that he didn't mean to. There's always good evidence in what he left behind. But in damage assessment, what he left behind could be something dangerous. He could have left behind back doors. He could have left behind the Trojan programs or a virus. You've got to be careful of what did he leave behind.
Question?
Go ahead.
Are your customers interested in putting a price tag on the damage done?
Are the customers interested in putting a price tag on it? They are, but that's not something that as a forensics examiner I can do. They know how long their system was down, what it cost to have me to show up to do this. They're aware of those cost factors. An accountant that needs to come in? Go ahead.
The loss of business, is that
Okay. Question was, does it matter the cost of the business? Is it grand larceny, or is there a threshold for a theft level or a damage level under law for prosecution? Under federal statutes, interfering with communication device or with a network is the crime itself. There are other crimes that occur in stealing information or intentionally causing the damage to that network. The dollar amount doesn't matter except for punishment.
Another question on the first bullet. In forensics in general, you may have a situation where a person who was done to was contributory negligent, okay, and therefore, in some states, it gets thrown out because that's the law. Do you find that there's a situation in jurisdictions where if the owner of the computer took off the password or something, and anybody could get in there, and this particular person just got up there and did his thing? Or is it crime enough to go there because you didn't have permission to do that, even though it was easy to do?
Okay. I think I understand your question. The question is, in some jurisdictions or in some areas, if somebody has a machine or a server that's up and it's easy access to take control of that box, and then crimes are committed from that box elsewhere throughout the country or the world, and your question is, if that occurs, is that person who left their machine wide open culpable?
Not so much. The person who actually did the crime, is he let off because, you know, it was an easy break-in, or this person was contributing to what happened?
Okay, I have you now. The rest of the question is the person who committed the crime by using that box that was out here that was easy to take control of and to use as a jumping point, is this person let off or charges dismissed against him? I've never seen that.
I think he's asking, like, if you left your keys in your car and you left the door open in your car and someone steals your car, are they still guilty of grand theft auto?
That is still theft.
Contributory negligence on your part by leaving the door open and the keys in the ignition.
Okay, that's two different issues, and one's criminal and one's civil.
If you share out your C drive to the entire world on the internet and someone takes all your files, is that a crime?
Yes, it is. Unauthorized access.
But you authorized it when you gave them permission to access the share.
I'll defer the rest of those to a lawyer. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? I think I've said this before, but we want to know, where did he go? File recovery. You talk to anybody that's done forensic examinations long enough, and the biggest request they get is, can you recover those files that we deleted or that was wiped off the suspect's machine? Or, I came into work yesterday and I had these files, and today these files are missing. Where did they go? A majority of the forensics work is file recovery. In examining suspect machines, that's a big part of what we're doing. We're looking to see what was on the machine, because as I said earlier, when you go to pull records from a internet provider and he cuts the internet service off to that hacker, the hacker knows what happened. He's going to start scrubbing his machine. He's going to wipe down as quick as he can. Usually, though, it's been my experience to find on the, as I call them, the children, they've been lazy. They won't wipe their entire box. They will wipe their tools or any evidence of the crimes they've been committing, and they think they're free. But under file recovery, we're looking for the deleted files. And again, I don't mean just sent to the recycle bin. We're looking for files that were deleted off the box. Look for hidden files. We're going to search in this slack space. I have bad blocks listed. I had to learn the hard way about bad blocks and how suspects will move information into a certain area on the disk or in the partition. Then they'll mark it as bad. Well, when the forensic examiner sat down to do his examination, he didn't see anything until the suspect confessed and explained how he did this and how he hid the information. Bad blocks are always an area to look at. How many people are familiar with steganography and use it? When network intrusion devices started coming around in the early 90s, we were noticing that we were doing keyword searches and we were doing looking for certain file signatures, looking for encrypted files. And I know that private business does that also. They're looking what's going out of their network outbound that's encrypted. Well, steganography is a nice change from having to encrypt a file, and by just using it and placing it into an image or into another file that appears to be innocent, and it can traverse the networks and go unnoticed. One of the hardest jobs a forensic examiner has is detecting a file that's been stegoed. And I'll, in a few minutes, discuss some of the tools that are out there that are used in forensics. But unless you're looking at a file with a disk editor, looking at it at a basic level, it's very difficult to detect a file that's been stegoed. X drives, recovering. Go ahead.
Do you know of any applications? I've asked this question on the forensics list out there. If anybody's aware of any tools to look for signatures of known stego programs like S-Tools or other popular programs, because there's definitely signatures associated with putting those files in there. And if we at least a tool to search for some of the common ones we have, they're usually lazier
Right.
than they are clever.
Now, the question is, am I aware of any applications or any, basically a hash set that will search for either the stego application or a file that's been stegoed? Okay. You mentioned S-Tools, and I'm going to show that in a minute. S-Tools is, in my opinion, one of the best stego tools there is because our forensics tools will not detect the stegoed file if it was used by S-Tools. But to answer your question, no, I'm aware of at least 100 different stego programs that are out there. A good many of them are Unix-based applications. And there are hash sets in the law enforcement community when they conduct a search, when you're looking for that particular application, but not one that will look for the particular file. File recovery off of X drives. This started coming to light about 2.5, 3 years ago when the young children started learning the FBI CART team's approach to recovering evidence off of their machines. When these free storage drives started showing up on the internet, offering 100 megs of space to park your files, our suspects started using them, and they used them heavily. And that's also, they would hack from different locations, and instead of having to carry something with them to carry that on media, they were just able to go straight to their X drive, pull their tool or a file that they had stored, and have quick access to it. The problem we run into is that a lot of X drives are not in this country. It's not a problem for law enforcement. It's not a problem for a civilian investigator, a private investigator, to go to another country to search for evidence. Most countries don't like investigators showing up searching for evidence. So X drives are a difficult process for us to handle.
Well, actually, if it's in a foreign country and such, and you've got your perp that has it, can't you just go off and download it?
No.
The law shouldn't apply, should it?
Yeah, the law still applies.
Okay.
No, the question was, if we already have the suspect or the perpetrator, can't we just go ahead and go to that X drive via internet connectivity and download the files? No, that causes international problems.
I just wanted to point out that an X drive is not a crime.
Oh, okay.
If you can find somebody using X drive, that doesn't indicate anything inappropriate.
Okay. Okay, his statement was that he just wanted to point out that having an X drive or utilizing X drives is not criminal in itself. And if it sounded like I said that, I didn't mean that. It's just we know that people don't keep evidence in their own backyard anymore. And so if we're going to look for evidence and try to recover files, we want to go to that X drive wherever it's located. And your question was, can't we just download those files from the internet? If we have a way to get to those files, can't we just download? Well, we can, but when I talk about the forensics process, I'll talk about needing bit-for-bit image in order to show original evidence. And you can't do that remotely without somebody's permission. NTFS streams, data streams, alternate data streams. It's another area that we spend a lot of time in.
Question. If we have an employee who stored a PGP disk on a network drive, they don't have to use an X drive or anything else slide, they just tuck it into an ARM file and that's the end of it. Is that usable? I mean, I would assume that it's just a brick on the network that we're not going to really get to because it's password.
Okay, question is, if a suspect puts a PGP drive onto the network, he says it becomes a brick. Is it usable? What can we do with it? At that point, you have to resort to other investigative skills and not just technical computer forensic skills. And please keep in mind that doing forensics analysis is just one part of trying to determine what the facts are and to prove facts. It's no different than that burglary investigator I talked about earlier that goes to the house that's been burglarized. He may get that tool mark and he may identify it to a screwdriver that Joe Schmuckatelli's got in his back pocket. But that's not enough to show that Joe Schmuckatelli committed that burglary. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What are the legal ramifications of trying to decrypt, say, like a PGP disk of a subject's hard drive you're doing forensics on? Just by word of mouth, we're not going past that point.
Could you repeat that question one more time?
What are the legal ramifications of trying to break a PGP disk on a subject's drive?
Okay. What are the legal ramifications of trying to break or decrypt a PGP drive? It's another subject I'm going to be speaking on in a few minutes, but it's legal authority. What authority did you have to conduct your search in the first place? If you have the authority to conduct the search, there are no ramifications. Okay.
Well, I'm thinking from it's a commercial product.
From the commercial product?
Maybe not everybody, I don't know. I know you can fix several things, but if it's got a plug-in proprietary encryption, am I even allowed to break that encryption?
Yes. Good luck.
Piggyback that one a minute. If my company gives a system for somebody to work on, then that's the company's product. I mean, that's the company's machine. In the process, there is consent for monitoring and all that, then I could go in and theoretically break into that disk at any time I wanted to without having to worry about the legal ramifications of doing it under consent of monitoring as long as I'm not targeting an individual, correct?
Okay. Before I answer that one, I want to say I am not an attorney. I'll give you my former professional law enforcement answer to that question. The question was, if it's my company's network, I own the boxes and I own the employee, what's going to prevent me from going to look at my own network, and what's going to prevent me from looking at my own box? And then you qualified it with, and if I'm bannered and there's a use policy in place, the employee knows that I can go and look at those machines. Generally, and again, this is my former law enforcement answer, and I'm not an attorney. Generally, nothing will prevent you from doing that. You're right, it is your machine, it is your hard drive. You can go look at it anytime you want to. However, before you do that, I would consult an attorney in the district that you live, because different districts within the United States have different opinions on whether you can go look at your own material. Doesn't matter what the banner is.
Thank you. Back to that, the informational assets is sitting on these machines are the property of the company, correct?
Correct?
Therefore, there's no privacy concern about the data that sits on their machines. By virtue of
Okay? His question and statement is, if that information that's on the machine is company information, it's proprietary.
No, I didn't say that. Their theory, when placed on their machine, is it therefore their intellectual property?
Okay, if it's placed on their machines, is it therefore their intellectual property? That hard drive can hold a lot of information. And this is a problem you run into. In one spot of that hard drive, it may contain some personal files of that suspected employee. And on a big place, it's going to hold information that pertains to that company. When you go to look at a machine, you're not specifically just looking in one focused area. You're looking at the whole area, and that's where privacy issues arise. It's because you're looking at the entire media, not a specific area.
I just have a comment to that. If you don't have company policies that don't have information security in them, then you won't. You can't just assume that people know what is valid for your company or not. So like if I have like 10 policies that cover email, internet use, all of that stuff, then I have the rights to go and review things and that sort of thing. If you don't, and regardless of whether people know the policies or not, because if it's sent out to all employees of a particular company, then you can go by that. And if your users say, well, I didn't know what the policy was, but it was distributed to all employees, then you can go after them that way. But you can't just assume if you don't have those policies in place, you can't assume that you can go around trying to gather that information because then you have a whole lot.
Okay, did everybody hear what she had to say? Does it need to be repeated? See, I was talking about file recovery. My favorite tool to recover files is a basic disk editor. I think I mentioned that a few minutes ago. Norton Disk Edit and the DOS prompt, it works well in looking at physical drives. And it worked well in the early 90s when the largest hard drive we encountered was 1.2 gigs. I recently encountered an 80 gig hard drive. The disk editor stayed in the shelf. I didn't use it. As an example of a very easy to use, and I wouldn't just rely on it only, application for recovering deleted files off of hard drives. Again, I'm not endorsing anyone's software. I'm not saying that this is the software to use, but I can tell you that in the forensics community, this is a widely used application. As you can see from the screen, it basically says what hard drive or what do you want us to scan to look for deleted files. You have a drop-down box. You can choose, I think it's up to 24 drives to scan. It will scan FAT partitions and NTFS, and it will recover, well, at least it will identify deleted files on those drives, and usually it will recover all of the deleted files. If the files are too fragmented, it will tell you, I believe the next screen is going to tell us, this is just a sample I did. See under condition it says hopeless? That's when you pull out the disk editor and you start working there and stay up all night. Question?
After the files have been deleted, if the disk is defragged, fragmentation, does that change any of this? Or will this still work?
All right, I think you said if the file was fragmented?
If it was deleted and then the whole disk is defragmented.
Defragmented. It'll say hopeless. And that's when you pull the disk editor out, and sometimes you can recover parts of the file. It's like putting Humpty Dumpty back together.
But at least it doesn't have been deleted, right?
Yes.
No, defrag recreates the directory structure. Your thing here is actually reading the deleted files of the directory structure. You want to know there's fragments of stuff on the disk. Yeah, I can tell by the question mark in there, which actually did you did the directory structure and went after the clusters.
On this one, that's what I did. Yeah.
Defrag programs do different things.
And then there are different utilities to use to search for those files that have been erased or deleted.
Actually, something to add to that, we accidentally wiped out 10 years worth of data. And in its recovery, we used this tool
Okay. And another part of using this tool was we identify the location of these files, and we're able to go back in and rebuild from there. Here's an example of S tools, and this is version 4. I think we had a few people that raised their hands that they've used Stego tools. This is quite simple to use. It can be booted straight from a floppy. You can go to the local library and use their machine to Stego files. You start the application. In this one, I took a GIF image, which was the JAWS logo. I drag it over, just drag it and drop it, put it in the window. I open up Windows Explorer. I find a file that I want to Stego. And I believe on this one, as long as it's under 6,172 bytes, which isn't much, but it's a small logo, I'm able to Stego that information, that file, into that GIF image, and it is hidden. Effectively, it's hidden. Another basic tool that's used for many different reasons is the OmniQuad Detective. I'm not endorsing this one. I'm just saying it's an ease-of-use tool, and it's not an end-all. It's not the only tool that's going to solve your problem. You need to look at forensic analysis many ways. The child pornography investigators love this one because I believe if you notice there's a checkbox that just says look for illicit material. It's going to look for known hash sets of child porno files. I think what I have set up is for computer hacking. Basically, it won't tell you that a suspect machine has been used to hack computers, and it won't tell you a victim machine if it's been hacked. You can put in search parameters. Basically, it's a fancy keyword search. And have it search for certain things within the network, and it will search across a network. And help you speed up your examination, your analysis, and give you pointers of where you need to go to next.
I read an article recently about another piece of software that can do something similar and actually processes through JFK files. So for facial images, flesh zones, outlines of certain organs, and it's amazing what we're doing.
And because of that application, there's some Stego applications that work on color palettes. And so the child pornographers have started using this particular application to Stego their child pornography to beat programs like that and to beat the known hash sets that forensic examiners use looking for child porno. This is a list of, and they're rather old, they're about 1.5 years old tools from NTI. NTI's produced a suite for NTFS forensics. When you understand the way the file system works on NTFS compared to FAT, you can understand why you need special tools. Out of this one, the disk search NT is a utility that is used quite often because it searches in spaces that other tools don't generally get to. Okay. This was a constructive critique of NTI software. He was saying that some of them work well and some of them don't. I'd say that about all of them. I go back to the Norton disk edit. I often will check if I use an application. I may use one that J.D. Glacier wrote that's it's called HFind. I'll use his suite and compare it against NTI's. Then I may run an in-case product, and I'll briefly talk about in-case in a minute. When you're doing the forensics examinations, you don't rely on one tool. This isn't a tough encryption to beat. It's Microsoft Word's encryption. However, in forensic examinations, I can't recall ever looking at a suspect's machine and finding anything that was encrypted. But when I do corporations and did help with forensic auditors, I was amazed at the number of secretaries that encrypt everything that they type. Every Excel spreadsheet, everything that they've done is encrypted. The executives in corporations, they only encrypt the things that could hurt them personally. I've never seen them encrypt anything that would hurt the corporation. But when you're trying to look at a file, you see a nice name and you say, well, I want to look at this, to search it and see what its content is, and you get these, it is frustrating. One of the last analysis I did for the Navy was on a shipbuilding contractor, and the chief financial officer had over 400 Microsoft Word documents that were encrypted like this. Wasn't tough to beat, but it sure was time consuming. I'm not endorsing access data as decryption tools. However, they work well and they're very simple to use. This is just an example of one of their password busters for Microsoft Office products. Basically, you insert what the file is and it'll start working on it for you. And as you can see, I think I put a small password in there so it would go very fast.
How effective is it against strong passwords?
It's not. The question was, how effective is that against strong passwords? I said it's not. It's time consuming. It takes a very long time. If you have one or two analysis machines and you have 400 documents to work through on trying to do the examination of those documents, your machine's going to be tied up for a long time just trying to bust passwords. Question in the back? Can you what now? The question was on the Access Data program, can you build dictionaries for it? Yes, it comes with a dictionary, but it also allows you to insert any dictionary you want to. NTFS streams, data streams. When this came out, the knowledge in the forensic and the law enforcement community that there was a way that a person could hide, and I don't know why law enforcement's always suspicious, but as soon as we heard about data streams, that's the first thing we think of is, how can you hide something with it? And with alternate data streams, we were concerned about, well, if they can hide a file into a stream of a legitimate file, we're never going to be able to find it. Now, I mentioned earlier about J.D. Glacier and tools, and at that time it was NT Objectives, and I believe now Foundstone. We were able to use his tools to find these hidden streams. He's not the only one that wrote them, but they were widely used in the law enforcement community, and it was spread around the United States very fast. But, and I don't know the fellow's name out of Great Britain, but there's a program called LADS. When we're looking for those alternate data streams on NT4 partitions, NTFS partitions under the NT4 operating system, we'll use SFind, or it's a utility called StreamFind, and LADS. We'll run both of them to look for those alternate data streams. Make sure I give him credit there. These are just some of the basic tools. The File Access Time Finder, never found much of a need for it, but SFind and looking for those alternate data streams, it's a good tool. However, I must say, I didn't find them or it wasn't used, and in suspect interviews, they never described using alternate data streams. But I am aware that law enforcement is quite familiar with this. In Windows 2000, and I believe it's a different version of NTFS, when there's an alternate data stream, the easiest way to find those is to move your partition that's on that NTFS partition, move it to a FAT partition, and before it allows you to complete that move, it'll tell you that there are alternate data streams. Do you want to continue with this move? Well, you can continue with the move, but you're not going to find that hidden data. So if you do want to look to see what's there, what's in those alternate data streams, just try it. Just try moving the NTFS partition. Question?
You're correct. It's called NTFS version 5. And
Okay. His statement was, did everybody hear his statement? Basically, it was that is a feature to the new NTFS. Yes, and that's the forensics problem. When I first started working with 2000 and working on techniques to look at a 2000 partition, I found that out. The screen just rolled and rolled, and I said, I can't believe this. But when you go back and you look at what those alternate data streams are, you have to work on a way to eliminate what's the legitimate and what's not. And I haven't found a solid way that works every time. And if anybody does know of a way to eliminate the standard alternate data streams, please let me know.
You don't want to, because the information you might want to be looking for may actually be the namespace and not actually the data behind it.
Okay.
A big long name might
Right.
be something. Even if there's no data on the hard drive, just in the table.
Okay, but I guess when I look at what's there and what is hidden, I always think about defense attorneys, and I've been cross-examined so many times. I always want to just make sure I know what was on a machine so I can testify to it. Tool analysis. What tools were used? How were they executed? What language were they written in? Somebody asked me yesterday in looking at suspect machines, what was the standard tool that I found? Was it homebrew, or was it basically scripts that were written by somebody else, or programs that were used for hacking? In the professional hacker, the entity that was attacking national resources in this country, they wrote their own tools. They didn't use anything else but their own stuff. For the average suspect, they used tools that were shared amongst other hackers or that were used for network security, penetration testing. When we found those tools on victim networks, we always wanted to have those tools or do a checksum or CRC on that file. So when we finally get to the suspect and we find that same tool, we want to make sure we can prove it. We want to know how was that tool executed or deployed. And in John Kutzenbaugh's presentation earlier on incident response, he talked about back orifice. There are numerous tools and numerous scripts that are deployed, and especially in the virus community. We want to know how was that deployed. We would consider certain Trojans tools. We want to know how were they deployed. We want to know what language they were written in. That really doesn't do any good to identify who the suspect is, but it does a lot when you identify a suspect. You have a virus that was written in VBS, and your suspect has no training, no education, and you can't prove that he even knows how to write a VBS script. That can hurt your case. Investigators aren't always out to hammer somebody. We can also use that to help them out and say, well, look, we know you didn't write it. You don't have the brains to write it. Who did you get it from? So it's always important to look at how was it written, what does it do? And I mentioned the file comparison. Log file analysis. That's a tedious process. Out of, 6 years of doing computer crime investigations, and I have to admit most of it was with the Department of Defense, so that's probably why there wasn't good log files to look at. The best log file analysis I've ever done has been in the lab. Because in the real world, system administrators, they either don't have the proper logging or auditing occurring within their network, or they don't archive their log files, they let them overwrite. So we get 7 days worth. It doesn't help. But what we're looking for is the events. What events are monitored. We also want to know what events are not monitored. These are self-explanatory. What do they reveal? I would assume everyone in here has looked at log files and audit records. You've done your own auditing of your own network, basically just looking to see how it's running. So this is self-explanatory, but to reconstruct an intrusion or to reconstruct unauthorized access, we need these files. We need them detailed, and we need them preserved. I'm briefly going to talk about Tripwire database. I'm not endorsing that product either. However, it sure does help forensics out when you go to look at a machine that's been exploited. It's just another tool that gives us a little bit more evidence. And connectivity logs. And that's not just for the victim network. On suspect machines, we're very interested in if they were using dial-up, any type of connectivity. We want to be able to show their connection. And when you have a hack and you're investigating it, you start with the victim and you work backwards. When you're working through different ISPs or different hops, you're always looking at their log files. So you may have good log files on your victim network, but all the log files in between to your suspect, they're not any good or you can't get them. So it can make the job of reconstructing the crime very difficult. In the evidence search, generally we're looking for image files, software applications, and not just the Microsoft Office products or the games that anybody has on their machine, but we're looking at all applications. Again, deleted files, the hidden files, encrypted files. I'm probably going to say something that'll get me booed, but why do you need to encrypt anything? The average user, why do they have to encrypt anything unless they have something to hide? I know you can say, well, I want to protect it.
It's not a laptop. You got corporate information out there, so it's client information.
Right. But when we as forensic examiners start looking at a system and our tools tell us these certain files are encrypted, we start wondering what's so important about this machine. They want to encrypt these particular files, and we'll focus on those files very fast.
A question on that, on encrypted files. Like if you've got a whole encrypted file system or we have a Windows file, and you recover the private key, you still don't have to, like, say, the passphrase, the authentication to go with it to activate the key, basically, so you can encrypt the file. Can you force the website to turn that over, or if they don't, is it like a Fifth Amendment? Or
Okay.
the only obstruction of justice?
Question is, when we run into encryption that we can't beat, can we force the owner of that encryption key to reveal the key or to help enable us to open up that file? I'm not an attorney. The answer is it depends. There are times that you can force via a court order to testify. You can force them to assist you in an investigation. In national security, courts can order somebody to testify. They can order them to reveal those encryption keys or to enable you to open up those documents. Generally, no. We can't make them do that. That answer? John?
In regards to the new information on search and seizure, is there a new implementation that basically states you go to a suspect's house and his girlfriend or wife's there and they give you access to the computer, you have full access to they have access to the computer?
Okay, John's question and statement was based on some recent guidelines he's read. If law enforcement goes to a suspect's home, a private home, to search a computer, to conduct any type of search, and the suspect's not there, but the girlfriend's there, and she gives permission to search that computer, is that permissible? And again, I'm not an attorney, but from 16 years of law enforcement, I'm going to tell you no. In order to give consent to search something, you have to be the lawful owner or in lawful possession of that computer. Now, if the suspect says, girlfriend, use my computer as you wish, anytime you want to, then yes, she can give consent. But that makes it very difficult to prove when it's the girlfriend who says, I didn't tell you you could search that computer, and my boyfriend's never given me permission to use that computer. And that always comes out at the evidence suppression hearing.
That's what after you find her email on there, right?
Hidden partitions. There was an agent with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service who was thrown into the fire to do forensic examinations that didn't even know you could hide a partition. He learned from a suspect how to do that and how to hide information in partitions. We look for that now. And then the basic keyword search. In those 80 gig hard drives, if you're doing a fraud investigation, it's a lot easier just to do a keyword search to pull up what you're looking for. Remote access tools, be it legitimate tools or illegitimate tools, we're going to look for them. We want to know if they were activated, if that was a process that was running on a machine. I'll try to speed this up.
Question.
Go ahead.
When you say his partitions, are you just looking for partitions that are marked with his flag and partition table, or actual data on partitions that have been removed from the partition table itself?
No, just flagged as hidden.
The reason I ask is because I use a certain boot manager that specifically is designed to allow more primary partitions than the partition table itself will allow.
Mm-hmm.
15 primary partitions. And in order to do that, what it does is it creates its own internal proprietary partition table. Every time you boot and select an operating system, it overwrites the existing partition table with a copy of a partition table containing whichever partitions you are specifically using. So
What?
at any point in time, you may actually have partitions on the drive that do not exist in the actual partition table stored as in the drive.
What boot manager program is this?
It's called Bootstar. I believe it's a German tool. If you go to bootstar.com, I actually find information on it, but it may be something worth looking into first because those partitions, again, may exist on the drive, but will just appear to be either invalid or unused space because they don't exist in the active partition table.
Thank you very much for that information. Go ahead.
We heard of TPE, so you can just have a separate partition after you access it directly, like say Linux or some of the other programs. You can actually write the data raw onto unpartitioned disk space. It doesn't have a partition at all. When you're doing your bid examination of the hard drive looking for string searches, are you only limiting it to the partitions, or are you looking at the entire image that you're recovering?
The entire image, looking at the physical disk level. Move on to the forensic process. Doesn't matter. We'll back up. In forensic sciences, and I'm only speaking from my experience as a crime scene investigator and my dealing in the forensics community and the criminal community, there's standards and there's methods and there's certain procedures, scientific procedures that are going to be followed. To my knowledge, except for the Department of Defense, there are no set procedures on how to conduct a forensic examination of a computer. And I think that'll change the more defense attorneys or trial attorneys learn about how forensics is done on a computer. The law enforcement community and the entire forensics community is going to have to adapt some new procedures. But out of dealing with forensic investigators, computer forensic investigators throughout the United States, and since I came on with Jaws up in Canada, I think you can break it down into these steps right here. It doesn't matter what you call them. You start off in the same way and you work through a logical process, in all reaching that end goal, to gather evidence, that proof that I talked about, and to be able to present that and have it preserved for court. Somebody had mentioned to me earlier in the day, and I've always heard this when I show up at sites where the network administrator has already done my job for me. They say, well, we made the copy of the file, and we're only going to admin discharge or take administrative action at Human Resources for this individual, which is fine. However, you're going to reach a point where you may start off with the intent of only going to admin ways of handling an incident, and it escalate on you rapidly into a full-blown criminal investigation. And I have witnessed that too many times. So when the forensic, go ahead with your question.
I was going to ask is if there was a fail-safe thing to do as an admin when you detect an intrusion or something you suspect is a crime, the best thing to do is unplug the box. I know
question is there a rule out there what to do when you determine you've been hacked or you believe you've been hacked? And he asked me, do you just unplug it? I'm not qualified to give you that answer. Our procedure that I've always used and been trained to use is to unplug it. Don't even shut it down. Unplug it. I think you could ask everybody in this room and they'll give you a different answer of why you should do it in a different way. As far as your own business, it needs to be in your plan how you're going to handle an incident. Am I correct, John? It's incident response plan?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what would help law enforcement.
For forensics examinations, unplug it in a heartbeat. We don't want anything written onto that disk that doesn't need to be written to it. It will start hiding information for us. Plus, if you have somebody that has access to your box and you let him stay in there, what's he doing that you don't know about? Is he taking evidence? Is he going to make it harder for the examiner? Go ahead with your question.
How would you go about examining a fully encrypted hard drive?
Interrogate the suspect first.
Obviously, most of the tools won't work.
I'm not aware of any tools that are available in the civilian community. The tools that I'm aware of that were in the Department of Defense community, there's a lot of legend that goes with those. It does, and I wasn't trying to sound smart about interrogation, but a lot of times it's going to require an interrogation. But there are tools in the military world that will help with encryption, but not on all levels.
Well, there's this program that we're getting ready to push out. It's called PointSet, and it's full drive encryption, for our laptops and things like that. What happens is profiles are pushed out and admins can get on.
Mm-hmm.
But is that the only way that you'd be able to do it, is to get on to an admin password and then
I'm not sure. I would have to talk to the folks that wrote that program and work with it in a lab. But from the investigator standpoint and looking for evidence, what's still saying there's more than one way to skin the cat, I'm going to look at a different way to go at and attacking that box.
Just to look it up, the question the other gentleman asked about what do you do when you notice you've been hacked? If you don't know the answer to that question, you better find out real fast. I'd almost say this is your first bullet point about being prepared. If you as a sysadmin today don't know what to do if you notice your system's been hacked, and you don't have tried and true methods to properly investigate the whole issue or even copy it down, so you're already screwed. Get it down. So the other thing, pull the plug works good, except I've also seen a number of tools that set memory. So if you're able to, on your box, port up it, do so. If you're not, just pull the plug. But literally, for your boxes, know what to do for your specific case. Otherwise, you're already going to probably mess up the whatever evidence you have.
Everybody hear him? Anybody need it repeated? Thanks a lot for that. On the forensic process, I'll go through these a little bit faster pace. We've already hit on a lot of this. It's confirm the authority to conduct the analysis and search. Well, it sounds like that's strictly meant for law enforcement, but it's not. Lawsuits, trial lawyers seem to get in the way everywhere. And if I believe you violated my privacy, I'm going to seek an attorney that will try to litigate this incident. As the examiner or as the system administrator is doing his own examination or as the CIO of the corporation, you're going to be held responsible for the actions taken on that computer. So always confirm that authority before you conduct the search. The key from going out into the wild blue yonder, you need to clearly define what the desired results are and why you're even contemplating doing a forensic examination. As I said earlier, 80 gig hard drives take a long time to go through. I described earlier, briefly described the method of which we image machines where we can preserve that original data. We unplug that machine, we make the hard drive, the suspect hard drive or the hard drive we want to image a slave. We use disk imaging software. We image, well, we lock the hard drive where nothing can be written to it. We image it. We protect the hard drive. We work with that image, and we constantly restore the image. Never work with the original. And when you make the image from when you restore that image onto a drive, make sure it's scrubbed, it's clean. You don't want any possibility that there was some files or data left on that hard drive that could have come into your new restored image. It's not possible, but the defense attorneys have learned that they can bring that out and show reasonable doubt. Your question?
Yeah, just what do you do to, a lot of the operating systems you might use, like Windows 2000, that's what we're here for, I suppose. So when you hook up a slave ID drive, 20 gig from some subject's hard drive somewhere, Windows 2000 is going to stomp on it by putting volume information on the hard drive.
Okay.
What do you do at the cable level or the
All right.
drive level to keep it read-only?
Question is, what do we do to keep the operating system from stomping on the hard drive? We use control boot disk, and I'll get to it in just a minute. We control the boot process. Under preparation, you want to ensure that all the tools that you're going to use, one, you've used them before in a lab environment, you know how to use them, you know what the results are. They're basic forensic tools that are out there in the forensics community, and nobody generally gets away from those. Though lately, new Linux applications have been coming out to do forensic analysis from a Linux box. That hadn't made it to the courtroom yet, and I'm anxious to see what happens when it shows up. I'm going to quickly hit the legal overview. This is a cite from a case that basically says if you're an employer and you have an employee box or a box that an employee is using, you can look at it. I always say consult with your legal counsel. I mentioned about protecting, and we protected the hard drive with hard drive locks, and nothing can be written to it. You want to protect it physically also. You want to be able to take custody of it and document that custody so you can always show that it was protected and you have something in writing that will refresh you and nobody can doubt you. Question?
When handling evidence, should it be done by 2 people?
Question is, when you're handling evidence, should it be done by 2 people? I think I know why you're asking that. 2 people, they both can check each other. You can say that, I noticed what he was doing. I'm a witness to what he did. That would be nice. It's not always possible. It's not required. But I will say, if you ever employ anybody to do forensic examinations for you, you need to get them to consent to a good, thorough background investigation, so you don't have those integrity questions that come up if this case does go to trial. I've seen that happen.
But then that's also why you lock up your original evidence as well, so it can be repeated if necessary.
That's correct. And he said you lock up the original evidence so it can be repeated if necessary. In the forensic process, we try to only have to image that original drive 1 time. Lock it away and never touch it again. And we always use the image file to constantly restore from it, because we can use the image file. We never want to touch that original drive again. And also, I'm going to go ahead and add that when you do a forensics analysis, do it all in one shot. Try your best not to have to come back at a later time, because the question always comes up, what did you miss, what did you forget? And when you explain, well, I forgot to do such and such, then the question's always, well, what else did you forget? Was your whole analysis, did you forget to do things? So always analysis 1 time and do it right the first time. We were talking about the boot process. Before you boot a machine, in the analysis process, we always disconnect the hard drive and check the settings to see what's set to boot. We go ahead and gather our other information about the machine at that time. I thought this was going to be the best format to show files on a controlled boot disk, but what we want to do is we boot into DOS. We want to load our drivers that we're going to need to do our analysis or to do our image, and we want our applications to make an image present on our boot disk. So when we boot to a floppy. The operating system of the machine that's contained on the hard drives are not booted. We're strictly booting DOS here. Does that answer what the question was earlier about? Okay. Right.
What this doesn't seem to address, though, is an NTFS partition.
Oh, okay. He said it doesn't address the NTFS partition. At this stage of a analysis, we're not looking at the partition itself. We're making an image of that drive. I'm aware of 3, maybe 4 bit-for-bit imaging software applications that are out there on the market. One of the problems that we've run into in the past, and I say we, anybody that's gone to do an investigation at a company or within the government, system administrators already taken care of that. They've ghosted the machine for you. It won't work, and I'm not poking fun because I learn something every day, and that's one reason why I was thankful for the opportunity to come speak today, was to explain we're looking for a bit-for-bit image. We're not looking for a copy of a partition or a copy of a drive. We want the physical drive. We want to be able to say we have the physical drive. And if y'all notice, I've increased the speed here. It's 6 o'clock, and I'll try to make sure we end this up. In case, it's application written by guidance software. I'm not going to say for a fact that it's the #1 forensic utility suite out there. Every law enforcement training academy is teaching it. Corporations are going to it. It is being used as a one-stop forensic utility, as an end-all cure to forensics analysis. It's a very useful tool. One of many tools that should be used in a forensic process. But it also will make an image, a bit for image for you. Another one that most of you are probably familiar with is Snapback. A lot of system administrators and network engineers use it. Another one, and I didn't have the fancy logo to show for it, is SafeBack. I think NTI has that product now. It was written by Sidex, or at least marketed by Sidex. An excellent program. When we sit down to look at a system, be it a victim machine or a suspect machine, there are a lot of things you want to look for. And, I am not a hardening expert on how to harden an operating system. And I often have to go get somebody that is. And that's one of the things that I want to look at on a victim machine was what was there? What version of the applications do we have running on this machine? What patches are present? What patches should have been present? And that's how I gather a lot of my information on the intrusion. You want to know what services are running? It doesn't just pertain to the services that allowed you to become victimized or for a potential for the victimization. It's all services. You want to document everything. I've already mentioned about the applications and processes. We want to know what belongs there and what doesn't belong there. It's very important to document the hardware. I'm not going to have to mention log files again. The system security and the application. What was in place? Sometimes that's hard to show because the intrusion will occur at one point in time and different security processes are applied at a later time. And so when we try to explain, well, this was occurring on the victim network, the question from the defense attorney is, well, if this was occurring, how did they get into the network? We always want to document when were changes made, if that's possible. A lot of times we do that from archived files or backups. We want to know what type of file system it is, what we're dealing with. Again, this is some of the things we're looking for in examination. I covered them earlier. I said earlier we were looking for encrypted files. We're also looking for the application that encrypts files. Let me go back to software. When we find a witness who says, I saw such and such on this person's computer, and we go to look at the computer and that such and such data is no longer there. Well, we question, did the witness really see what they saw? We look for wiping programs, BC Wipe. The one that I saw regularly was Shredder. Not endorsing it, but it does a great job. We want to look at published shares and permissions, what's out there. We want to see if password files that don't belong on a suspect's machine are there, and what network do they belong to. We want a list of all the security identifiers. We want to document the network architecture, and we want to know the trust relationships. The forensic examination isn't strictly just looking at the data on a machine. Sometimes it's actually looking on an entire network and crossing boundaries. We want to know what's out there. Back to the X drives, all the offsite storage. And briefly on SID, mainly this has been successful in internal investigations. SID is issued to an account at the time it's created. It's used in the domain to track processes, not the user name, it's not the account or group, it's the SID. So when forensically we go in and look at a system and look at processes and look at things that have occurred, we're looking at the SID. And that usually identifies to us who the user is, or at least where the machine was. Briefly, where you find that it's in the registry, I would assume everyone in here has looked at SIDs and knows more about them than I do.
Do you have any tools for looking at offline registry files?
Tools for looking at offline registry files? No, I don't. Do you? Okay. A quick, simple diagram. SID travels from the workstation to the domain controller when it logs on, and then for all the processes after that. In the SID structure, first big part of that number is the domain identifier. The last four is the actual identifier, relative identifier, identifies the count. And there's a sample of a SID, and that last four that's underlined is the relative identifier. Now I think I'm about to wrap this up. On internal investigations and external investigations, forensic examiner, if he doesn't ask for a list of the user accounts and to know when they were established, he should offer them up to that forensic examiner. Many times there are accounts that are out there that should have been disabled that weren't, and during the forensics process, sometimes it's very easy to look at what happened on an employee that left a business or left the service of this employer, and his account's still available, somebody else uses his account. Always make sure they have that handy to look at and to review. And just sample of users. Documentation. Don't know if anybody or everybody saw John's presentation on incident response, but one of the things he mentioned was from the time you get notified of an incident, start documenting. I couldn't stress that enough. And in forensics examinations, document everything. I mean, everything. Because you can't go back and recreate what you did in your forensic analysis. When you set out that 5-step plan and that preparation and clearly define what it is that you're doing and why you're doing this, make a list of why you're looking at certain data, what techniques you used, what software you used. The scene, sometimes it's tough when you go into a large corporation and have to diagram their network when they don't have an updated diagram for you. Document it. When you go to a workstation at the employee's workstation, you want to document it. You want to take photographs. You want to know what was connected to it. You want to know what papers were laying around. What books did they have on their bookshelf? You may never need it, but you can't go back and recreate it. In gathering the evidence and having it ready for presentation, utilize screen capture, and off of your restored image, copy the suspected files and place them into an evidence file so they're easily accessible and can be reviewed by others. All applications for analysis, your in-case, your safe-back, all your tools, even freeware tools, document what you're using. Sometimes it's tough to do, but document the license. There have been cases where forensic examiners have used certain software utilities that they got from a buddy who got from a buddy who got from another buddy, and the defense attorney in the evidence suppression hearing says, let me see your license. What's the license number for that utility that you were using? I don't have it. There goes the evidence. It makes it quite difficult to get it administered or admitted as evidence. Case usually goes downhill very fast from there, and you won't be doing forensics much longer in that district. Okay, again, when any technique you use, and there's dozens of ways to conduct an analysis of machines, but you got to focus it towards the file system. What is it that you're working with? As far as from forensic examiner standpoint, I love the NTFS partition because if it's used properly and all the features, there's more evidence for the examiner. And just remember that when you or the investigator shows up to do a forensic analysis, he's looking to establish facts. He's not trying to hang somebody. He's not trying to help somebody skirt and get out of trouble. He's just looking for facts, and it's like Sergeant Joe Friday says, just the facts. That's all you want to do is just the facts. And as long as you can always show that you've been neutral in your work, or the examiner can show that he's always been neutral, he's not going to have a problem when he gets on the stand with credibility. And I think that's it. Question?
Are there any tools out there you use to coordinate badge access logs and phone logs and such with system logs?
Okay. Question is, are there any tools to coordinate or I guess examine, analyze different types of logs, different data from logs?
Yeah, like the phone system, the built-in badge system.
I'm not aware of any commercial products that do that. What I have always done is taken that data and put it into an Excel database and worked with it from there. Are there any other questions? I thank you all very much and for staying extra.